Every week in Australia, one woman is killed by her partner or by an ex-partner in domestic violence. That's kind of a shocking thing to take on, to think something like that could happen. It's kind of almost incomprehensible, I suppose. And when speaking about violence, there's been quite a new thing happen here in New South Wales, where Parliament has put through tough new mandatory sentencing laws for fatal one-punch assaults. It's a kind of interesting thing. I think the public has come out very much, and the media, to show that there is an intolerance and a fervour against the idea of alcohol-fuelled violence. And I, as a mother of a son and as someone who's against violence, are very much on board with not supporting violence. And while I'd have to say I'm not a great supporter of mandatory sentencing, I don't really think that's a solution, punishing people after they've done it. You actually want to get people before they do it. So it's a different intervention from my personal point of view. But the ethos is about the public conscience, about the media, about what comes as story. And according to the Sydney Morning Herald, there's been something like, I think, 90 deaths from what they're now calling, funny in the media, they've actually almost branded a thing called the one punch. It's almost become like a slogan or the King hit or something like that. But there's been about 90 deaths since the year 2000. Considering that at least one woman dies, a week in Australia, since the year 2000, we're now looking at 780 women at least dead through domestic violence, in comparison to 90 dead through what's called the one punch. Now, I'm just doing this to show, I think, a little bit of a difference in what we tolerate as far as violence, and how we don't tolerate one sort of violence and yet seem to have become almost numb to another. So why is it, that we seem to just accept domestic violence, or the media doesn't seem to give it the attention that they've been giving, all the one-punch stories? Does it mean, if you do the mathematics on it, that that 8 dead women are equal to 1 dead young man? I mean, it's a harsh thing to say, but is that the media currency of how they value life? Why aren't there more stories in the public domain about domestic violence, about alcohol-fuelled domestic violence? Because they rarely make it. You rarely hear a story about domestic violence, and you know why? Because they're not unusual. They're ordinary. They're never really going to make it. You have to do something extraordinary, like, set fire to the woman or kill yourself, and then you'll only get just a mention. It won't be carried on. And they'd never actually consider to link the stories of domestic violence, to join the dots and create a much bigger picture of the horror that we live with domestic violence. And so you wonder why you do that, and why does the media not pick those stories up? Why is the public conscience inflamed into only one area of violence and not another? Surely both deserve attention, and surely both are rooted in the same sorts of dysfunction. And yet we don't see proposals for mandatory sentencing for domestic violence. When you also look at, I think in 2005, the Australian Bureau of Statistics did a personal safety survey, and it came back that just under 500,000 women in that year had reported that they had been somehow sexually assaulted. That's 500,000 women reporting sexual assault for that year. That's it's incomprehensible. And for me, it just shows how much we as women have normalised violence against us. It's somehow we're outraged if violence happens in the street, because random violence somehow seems far worse than violence in our homes. It's almost like we accept the home is a less safe place, that somehow if you're in a relationship or your partner or ex-partner it kills you or is assaulting you, that's somehow not as bad, or it doesn't deserve as much attention, that it's swept under the carpet to an extent. I'm not saying one thing is better or worse than the other. I'm just asking the question of why we aren't outraged. Why aren't we as outraged? Why aren't we 8 times as outraged by the figures that we have for domestic violence against women and children? And we should be. And we should be trying to make the kind of changes and ask the kind of question and make the cultural kind of moves that we need to do. There's no 1 a.m. lockouts being suggested in people's homes to stop alcohol-fueled violence in the suburbs. You know, it's just close the door. You know, because the real violence isn't happening on the street. The real violence is happening in the house next door, or in your house, in your street, in your town, or in your city, behind another door. Maybe it's not you, but it probably could be someone you know. It could be a sister or a mother or an aunt or a friend of a friend. And in a sense, there has to be some sort of community responsibility, some sort of outcry, some sort of public arena, which goes beyond helplines and beyond the odd story here and there, which actually connects the dot about all the violence that we experience in our society. So I would ask, you know, those of you who really feel that you want to make a stand against violence against women and children, to be part of V-Day, which is a Billion Rising Day on the 14th of February in Byron at Main Beach. It's asking for women, you know, to come down, and children, dress in red, be there at 7 a.m. for a 7:30 a.m. start, and come together as a community and show that you are just as outraged and that you don't tolerate domestic violence and violence against women and children. Oh, fly. Violence against flies. It's okay.